the two giants of the modern era in terms of coaching and tour victories and major wins. These are the two best coaches of the modern era by far. But their coaching philosophies are not entirely the same, and in fact in many ways are completely at odds with each other. So in this video I thought it'd be quite fun and educational to see if we can take a look at the core differences between the Pete Cowen model and the Sean Foley philosophy. Okay, first up then is their personalities. So Pete Cowen always wears black. I don't think he owns anything other than black trousers, black jumper, jacket, and his black Callaway hat. A Yorkshireman has a reputation for telling things absolutely straight and as they are, and if you're not getting it right, he will let you know that. Where he gets his information from and has developed his philosophy, I'm not entirely sure. There's no sort of obvious link, but clearly through years of experience and working with players at the highest level. He was also a really good player in his own right, so no doubt has a whole history of information and wisdom that he's carried on into his own coaching. And then there's Foley, who has a slick haircut and a more kind of colourful image. And he was originally born in Canada, made his way to the States and had some success with some sort of medium-ranked tour players before he got the big gig with Tiger Woods. He is definitely has taken a major influence into his coaching from sports science. I think he's got a master's in biomechanics himself, but he has taken influences from motor learning, motor control. Certainly the big one is biomechanics. He works a lot with Sasha McKenzie and our own Dr. Mark Bull, who contributes regularly to the channel. Talks about his time spent with neuroscientists. So he has a much more rounded and holistic approach to coaching than Cowen, who is straightforward and down the line. Okay, let's get into their swing models, but I'm going to keep it really concise. Otherwise, this would be an incredibly long video. If you want to get more into the main kind of concepts and how they differ, then I'll provide some links down below. But this is going to be a whistle-stop tour into the key differences between the two philosophies. Okay, let's get going with the backswing then. Pete Cowen is famed for his model of the spiral staircase. So rather than thinking about turning in the backswing, he uses the spiral staircase as his analogy. And that is the idea that as we're rotating, we're also extending the right side. So he talks about the energy of the swing going from your lead ankle to your trail shin, lead shin to knee, knee to mid-thigh, thigh to hip, etc., all the way up the body, so that as we're turning, the right side is getting higher, and then the opposite would happen in the downswing. In transition, we're getting back down that spiral staircase. Well, that's the same thing is true for the leg action in Foley's model. He talks more about the stretch phase, which is quite unusual, I think, and must have come from biomechanics. So rather than rotating as such, as a feel or an intention, he talks about the stretching of the arms away from the body, and that in turn putting that rotation into the rib cage. And as he gets this stretch phase, you can see how my spine is in flexion, i.e. it's still tilting a little bit to the right. That is a big deal for him. Absolutely no extending of the spine this way and keeping the head too still. And the analogy he uses is the passing of sandbags along a line of people. He says, imagine you're in a flood and you're passing sandbags from one side to the other. Hence the stretch phase, the body chest flexion, and that kind of lateral motion. The downswing then is probably their big point of difference. This is where Cowen has his whole philosophy around creating downwards pressure. Everything in Cowen's model is about not getting the club stuck behind you and applying downwards pressure onto the ball. So having got to the correct backswing, he talks about the right arm spinning down, or the trail arm spinning down and applying that downwards pressure. So the wrist is still in extension and the right arm drives down. He talks about loading the shoulders and getting that downwards pressure, which in turn kind of invokes a response from the body. But for him, it is arms in front of you and getting some downwards pressure. And he seems to allude to the idea that is the kind of motor control center of the swing, the coordination center, if you like. If you can get that motion of the right arm spinning down and applying that downwards pressure, the body is going to react, it's going to extend, it's going to rotate. But it all comes from getting that correct motion of the right arm applying that downwards pressure. Arms in front of the body and downwards pressure. Foley, on the other hand, well, he has his speedboat analogy. So this would have come from biomechanics, and in particular a paper from Sasha Mackenzie, I think about 10 years ago, where Dr. Sasha Mackenzie modelled the swing, and this was the whole kind of philosophy. The idea is that the club's centre of mass, let's call it club head, needs to be behind the hands at a point where the shaft reaches horizontal on the way down. And if it can do that, it's a very simple motion then to slow the handle down and start rotating, and then the passive forces on the club are going to swing out and square it. So we're pulling the club down like so. The club head is behind the hands, and then it very easily swings out. And if you've ever made that move, it is it's just a fantastic feeling. It's almost like the club kind of whips off you and it squares up almost on its own. The speedboat part of the analogy then is, as Foley would put it, speedboat, water skier, and if they're pulling in the same direction, so that's the handle and the centre of mass, then they're only ever going to go at the same speed and in the same direction. Whereas when the speedboat starts to slow down and turn the corner, that sends the water skier flinging out and speeding up as it kind of goes around the corner. And that is that amazing feeling at the bottom of the swing where the club kind of rotates in that manner. Club head behind the hands at this point is definitely not Pete Cowen. That is an absolute no-no for him. He wants it down and in front of him. And then the release pattern. Now, if I get this wrong, don't hate me, but this is what I see going on with Pete Cowen. He loves pressure fade. So his big thing is the pressure fade. So that is the notion. We've got the arms in front, and through the ball he is keeping pressure on the club. That's that right wrist staying extended, but as the body rotates, the hands are going to rotate around to the left while keeping pressure on the club, which presumably means to some degree keeping that right wrist extended, and then he'd sort of work it around to the left while holding the face off. So the hands would be going more around to the left and then upwards in this manner. And that is his notion of the pressure fade. But with Foley, he wants the club exiting kind of straight down the line and the arms staying more in front of you. So he would say the only reason the arms go left is because the body is turning left. So the club head is behind the hands midway down. The club rotates, so it rotates this way, swings out in front, and then continues to kind of stretch out down the line with arm extension, hip extension, and not a great deal of wrist motion involved. Okay, last one, and that is the kind of the general energy and sequencing in the swing. From his sciencey background then, Foley talks about myofascial stretch release, stretch and shorten. So that's the elastic qualities of the body, of the muscles and the fibers which would stretch, and then as they recoil, there's this huge kind of power in that motion. So a simple throwing motion has what's called a kinematic sequence. You move things in the right order, it stretches the body, and then it kind of gets released. So you would hear Foley talking about ground reaction forces and powering the swing in that way. You would also see him doing step-in drills to see if you can really kind of build on that sequence and get the right kind of stretches throughout the system. Whereas Cowen's model is really built around something he completely hates, and that is the idea that the golfer has tried to rotate really hard, back to our throwing analogy, and left the club behind them, trapped on the inside, still dragging the handle, and unable to get any downwards pressure. It seems like his whole kind of philosophy is built around getting rid of that shot. I suspect in his playing history that was probably his miss. I don't know that, just a hunch. So you wouldn't hear Cowen talking about trying to rotate the hips or use ground reaction forces. I'm sure he acknowledges ground reaction forces, but in his world, the body reacts to the way that we are trying to apply that downwards pressure, and that is why we get these kind of this kind of vertical forces and indeed a lot of the rotation as well. Definitely not a sense of trying to rotate and leaving the club behind. For all these differences then, you would think it would be really easy to see a Foley student and distinguish them from a Pete Cowen student. But we need to remember that players go to see these coaches and they have their own kind of long-standing patterns, and the coaches are just kind of introducing ingredients, if you like, to try and readdress a balance. But when you have a player who's worked with these coaches for a long time, so that would be Stenson with Pete Cowen, and I suppose Champ with Foley, then you can start to see, as they've kind of, worked on these principles for a longer time. So Champ has this amazing sense of fluidity and power, which I mean, that's a lot of that's genetic. Let's be clear. But I mean, the whole motion of the swing is incredibly fluid. There's this huge rotation of the lower half, lots of kind of drive from the legs, and the club shallows behind him. Center of mass is way behind him, halfway down, and then it whips out in front. The body slows down at the appropriate time, and we have this amazing kind of fluidity and speed that looks completely effortless for what is nearly 200-mile-an-hour ball speed. And there is Stenson, absolutely incredible player, not short by any degree, but the whole thing looks harder. It looks more controlled. It looks like he's loaded his shoulders and he's trying to apply pressure with his arms. There doesn't seem to be these kind of passive forces that are lining the club up, and the same kind of deceleration forces that are applied with the Foley model. Everything seems to be much harder with Stenson's motion. When I say harder, I don't mean more difficult. I mean physically harder. The muscles seem to be more tense. He is applying that pressure. The shoulders are loaded, and everything kind of slows down together. Whereas, with Champ, there are deceleration forces, which in turn are speeding the club up, and that's that beautiful kind of fluid, flowing, balanced follow through. So if your mind is anything like mine, it will be taking you to a place where you're thinking, now, which one am I? Should I be more fluid and accelerating and, all these kinematic sequencing, or should I be more kind of controlled and all about pressure? Well, you don't need to make that decision, not yet at least. I think the real gold in understanding these two kind of amazing coaches isn't what they disagree on, but it's what they agree on. Imagine all the time they've spent, all the wisdom shared between them. If there's real core fundamental principles that they both agree on, then I think we should be paying attention. So that is my next video, link down below. And until I see you next time, keep practicing. Good luck. Play well.